and we sent the boat up into the air, and when we crashed, my face came forward and just smacked into this hard reinforced lid on this plastic tote that was my has all my tools and stuff in it. And so when I came back up, my nose is bleeding and my face is, I have this big flap of skin that's flopping, the boat's going sideways, and I felt the light just fade for a moment. And he looked at me and he's like, "Your face is falling off."
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Wild Dispatch. I'm Robin and I'm back with more skills and stories from the wild. I am actually in the wild at the moment. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see I have my full ridiculous outfit on. I think I mentioned in the last episode, it is turkey season at the moment. Some fun has been had this morning, birds located. Just hearing a sound in the distance for a second. It was close, but again, no luck, sadly. Some luck, but not enough luck. Alas, they crossed over the river in a different spot, so I couldn't close the distance in the time that they then disappeared up into the woods. And as it isn't the mating season, then calling them in, unless they get disrupted, it's not going to be very easy. I'm not an expert, though, so that could be wrong. If that is wrong, then get in touch and tell me how to be better at hunting turkeys. There's a squirrel right here. If he comes any closer, I might have to take a consolation prize. Today's episode has been hyped for a number of weeks now. I managed to have a conversation with a guy called Stephen, who is an absolute... the man has so many amazing stories. What a toolbox of close calls and adventures. He is an Alaskan who does a bunch of outdoorsy shit, but he also has these amazing jet boats, which are inflatable. That means he gets to go further into the boonies and deeper than most people can. He can get into the real thick of it, take animals, and then pull them out. And these animals aren't small, they're Alaska big, like moose. We're going to jump into this episode any second now, but first I'm going to take a moment to do a bit of housekeeping and say, if you are new to the podcast, then welcome. It's lovely to have you here. If you could subscribe or follow this podcast, then that would be amazing. It means you're always up to date. If you are a returning guest, then welcome back. It would be amazing if you could share this podcast with a friend or an enemy or anyone who you think would enjoy the kind of wilderness-based content that we produce. Right, I think that's everything for now. Here's Stephen. I can't actually see. Oh, I think it started recording now, hey? Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. I'm excited to chat. So, but actually, I should ask, because your email is Steve. Are you Steve or Stephen? What do you go by?
It sort of depends on who you are and at what point you met me in your life and how you choose to express yourself, I guess. My older brothers have nicknames for me, some of which I can't mention. My friends is usually Steve. Some of them are Steven. I don't think it really matters. Whichever is more natural for you, it's probably fine for me.
I'm going to call you Stephen for now.
That sounds great.
We'll go from there. So ultimately, you've been up to some amazing shit since we started talking to each other maybe 9 months ago, maybe a little bit less than a year. I've been getting like a flow of videos and pictures from you of all kinds of things that have been making me exceptionally jealous. One of which was, and this is a long-winded way of getting to setting up who you are and what you do. But ultimately, You sent me this video of like an enormous bull moose, like the biggest bull moose I've ever seen, striding through a river that you happen to be going along at that moment.
Yes.
What were you doing there, and how come you saw this enormous moose?
So a couple of years ago, I was looking for different ways to begin exploring sort of my environment. And we live in Juneau, Alaska, which is like the capital city here in Alaska. But we're sort of like landlocked in the sense that we don't have any roads out of here. We have to take ferries out of here, or we have to take planes in order to get out. And so if you live in the town of Juneau, it's only, 35,000 people. And it's not enough of a metro to really be all that exciting, but it's connected to these beautiful, amazing wildernesses, which are not very far away, which you can meet in almost any direction. So one of the ways is like, how do you scheme about figuring out how to experience as much of that as possible? And, when you're moved into a new town and you don't have many connections and you don't have a history of family and resources and other stuff, you sort of bore your way into it. And so I started like a lot of younger guys do, and started out with a little skiff, and then from a skiff I got a little jet boat, and from a jet boat I got a slightly larger boat, and every single iteration of that allowed me to get a little bit further and a little bit further into the wilderness and sort of explore and see stuff that I wasn't otherwise able to. One of my great companions, I call him my little brother, but he's from a different family. But we've lived together growing up down on Prince of Wales, sort of with a subsistence lifestyle, sort of a backwoods way. Grew up without electricity or plumbing, and we sort of had some bonds that sort of resonated through that. And we both ended up here in Juneau, so we both had a sense of like, how do we explore where we're at and what we're doing? And he's very fastidious in his obsessions, and he started thinking about, well, if we could get a way to deploy a boat off of a larger craft that would allow us to sort of expand our range, that would be very, very cool. And so the first thing he bought was like a 3-foot wide by 12-foot long John boat, which was essentially shaped perfectly like a coffin. And it was exactly what it should have been, because it was an absolute death trap. And before putting a jet motor on it, he bought essentially like a snow machine motor that's extended on a whip. So it's one of these mud motors that you see, very low horsepower mud motor with a long shaft going down to a prop. And he thought, let's explore this way. And so we were able to drag that thing behind a skiff or put it inside of a skiff and then get to the mouth of a river. And then very, very slowly and tediously and carefully, essentially in a John boat that's shaped like a canoe, kick our way at a very low rate up these rivers to access, for us, what was the main sort of primary goal was to get into spots where we could steelhead fish where other people weren't steelhead fishing, or where people that had jet boats or fly-ins could. So we were trying to expand our range to do that. And he had a few hairy, I wouldn't say maybe near death, but probably near death experiences in that boat, most of which I wasn't involved in because I sort of had condemned it as quite foolish from the very beginning. And I decided we should get a jet boat. So I bought a jet boat. That was a small jet boat. It was a G3, I think made by Yamaha or someone. It's a 14 feet long and 48 inches wide. And I bought a Yamaha 4030 jet for it. And I thought, well, we're set to conquer the world. And
so, quick question then.
Yeah.
So that people know, because I'm only asking because I didn't know until we spoke before.
Sure.
But like a jet, I mean, not a jet engine, but like a jet boat, and it's kind of the way that the engine operates. Could you talk through that a little bit, just so people understand that and why it exists?
So in the 70s, people were trying to figure out how to go up rivers and how to go in shallow water and try to sort of get to places that a general prop boat couldn't do. And there was a race of these different theories of how you could create this sort of water propulsion. New Zealand is kind of like the motherland of jet boating, but in New Zealand, it's mostly inboards. So they have an inboard with a grate on the bottom that has an intake, and they'll draw it through. And they have some small boats that are, 5 meters or even less that'll have an inboard. But for us
Okay.
here in the States, a lot of us are running outboards. And so we didn't have a way of running an outboard jet. So they they came up with a version of a lower unit, which means basically you take a standard outboard motor and you'd unbolt the propeller aspect of it and remove it. And you'd bolt on a new unit, which has a shaft that comes down to a vertical oriented impeller, which is sucking water up into it. And then it throws it around this clamshell like volute and it expels it as a water jet. And so you essentially don't have anything spinning that's exposed down to the bottom.
Okay.
You've just got a slightly angled vertical set of grates, which are drawing water up in, spinning it around the volute, and then expelling it out, and you're getting a jet water propulsion. And so that's why it's called an outboard jet, is because of the jet propulsion that is being created.
So the benefit is then that you can go places where there's no
Yeah,
chance of a prop, what's it called, a prop
exactly.
strike.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that means you can go much further, much shallower, rougher
Yes.
terrain.
Yeah. So for a prop, they have a cavitation plate which sits above the propeller, and you have to have that set in the water this way, and your propeller is spinning down here. And they have
Yeah.
some occasions of rescues that they run a cage around that prop and try to protect it. But essentially, a jet allows your intake to sit up almost flush or even slightly above the bottom of the boat. And so any planing surface that you can create with your boat at speed, the water will be coming along. And if it's a tunnel jet, it will lift up into the tunnel, creating a downward vacuum, and it'll suck into the intake of the jet, get thrown around this clamshell like volute, and then squirt out as a water jet at the back, which is pretty cool. It takes your ability to run in like 12 inches and it moves it down to maybe 2 to 4 inches,
Wow.
depending on the shape of the boat and whether it has a delta pad or whether it has a tunnel. But some of these boats can run in like they're basically creating their own water as they go, and they're able to
Yes.
just sort of gather water and run up on a pocket. And it allows, if you can imagine, like some people akin it to like the snow machine of the boating world, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
snow machines were just absolutely transformative in their power of where you could reach. The jet boat sort of has that way about it, and the aluminum jet boat has ruled for a long time because aluminum boats are awesome, but they have this downside, and the downside is that they get stuck on rocks, and when you get sand, you come to a very quick decelerative stop, and sometimes eject the driver or the passenger.
So I was going to ask you, your friend who sort of became equivalent to a sibling of yours, you said he had
Yeah,
some real close calls, maybe
yeah,
even some near-death experiences. Do you mind sharing one of those
yeah.
maybe? Do you know, he must have told you the story.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. And I've been with a few of him on him, and uh he's perpetually getting himself into trouble. He's one of these sorts. If you've ever read, there's a famous book called The Wind in the Willows.
Yeah.
Have you ever read this book?
Are you going to reference the toad, I'm guessing?
He is absolutely the toad. And
So,
every new shiny thing that he exposed to, his little mind just goes boop boop. And in the book, one of my most favorite parts of the book is the toad has a new chariot, or not chariot, but a new carriage, and he's getting pulled by a horse, and he's showing it off to his friends, and he's driving down the highway, and all of a sudden this motor car comes careening around the corner, and it just absolutely, like, he's in a flush. He steers to get out of the way. He crashes his wagon. He ends up in a total pile of dust, and the motor car is just gone. And his two friends rush over to him, and they go to care for him and see if he's okay. And he's just sitting there in the steering position, and all he does is he goes boop boop. And it's just very funny, like an insight into this sort of little ADHD mind that, like, whatever new shiny lure gets drifted in front of it just becomes this complete perfect obsession. And so he's very toad-like in that way, and he's the one who essentially drew me into this world of inflatable jet boats.
so did he just crash into rocks, or he just like was going too fast, or what happened that time?
Numerous of things, yeah. So at times he would crash into rocks. I think the main one is there's a stream that we were trying to access, and there's a main river, and it comes in as a tributary. And since the main river has considerably more flow, there's a pretty hard corner, and it creates a pretty steep bank wall. And if you have a boat that has any sort of size or any sort of power, this isn't really an issue for you because you can just power through it. But in the coffin, with a little, I don't know, 5.5 horsepower motor going maybe 3 knots upstream, you have to negotiate that a lot differently because you don't have the power to sort of rescue yourself. And so he got stuck in that seam, and they got pushed against the wall, and the boat came sideways and took on water. And it was just a whole myriad of events which could have been very bad, but somehow the toad survives. These type of people, they always find a way. They say cats have
Brilliant.
9 lives, but these sorts of people have more than 9, I think.
So I guess you've kind of set up jet boats a little bit. However, what we didn't talk about is the designs of the boats that I've seen you doing incredible things with. Is like the inflatable nature. It's kind of like is it like a rib, or it's not really rigid inflatable? It's just fully inflatable underneath. Is that right? So that it can.
Yep, it's fully inflatable. So after a few maybe near-death experiences, the toad, he is in an all-night internet session, found these very cool boats in Russia. And he started watching these videos on YouTube of these people in Russia in these inflatable jet boats that had a poly bottom, which is a flexible polyurethane bottom coating over top of a PVC boat. And it had an integrated jet tunnel into it, so it could run very shallow. And he decided, hey, we got to get on this train. We got to figure out what this is about. These boats look very, very capable. They're running through the kind of stuff that we want to get through, and they look much safer than this coffin that I'm driving. So he started talking through Russia in whatever ways that he did. I'm sure there's some technology apps and stuff like that he used to communicate with Russia. And he tried to get himself a boat, and he had almost done it when finally the guys in Russia said, hey, there's a guy up in Wasilla that we're talking to who's going to become a dealer of these boats. Why don't you talk to him instead? And so my friend Troy, the toad, he got in touch with this guy named Jim Bracker up in Wasilla, who has a long history of jet boating through different types of jet boats, and even going through the Gary King Alaska Jet Ranger and a lot of inboards and stuff. And he went over to Russia and met with them and found out about their boats and decided to do a sportsman show. So Troy contacted him through the Russian connection, and Jim said, well, if you guys are willing to come help me with this show, set up and tear down for the show, I'll do you a solid, and I'll sell you one of these boats at cost. And so I said, okay, great, go ahead and go do that. So my friend Troy went up and he helped him with the show, and he came back. And when he came back, he had ordered one of these. It's a 420 model, which means 4.2 meters. And he didn't really have a jet for it, so we took the jet motor off my aluminum boat, and we went up one of the nearby rivers. And the first day we ran it, it was like, this is incredible. This is fundamentally changing the way that we are going to be able to experience the outdoors from now on. And that day I ordered a boat, and 6-7 months later I got one and went through the process of setting it up. And then it was just, where can we get that people haven't got before? Just pure adrenaline, pure excitement, just finding the boundaries of the boat, spending a year or two destroying the boat every weekend, and then patching it and rebuilding it and repairing the motor, and then thrashing it the next weekend. And just, going through the whole process of trying to establish these boats with a little bit of legitimacy. Like, a lot of people would come by and say, oh, you have a jet boat? And you say, yeah. I say, well, it's rubber. And you say, yeah. And they say, well, mine's aluminum. And I say, well, that's cool. They say, well, what do you do with that thing? And I say, well, I go jet boating. And they say, well, where have you gone? And I say, oh, I go up this river. And they say, oh, yeah, well, I go there, but I can only get to this point. And I'm like, oh, well, have you ever been to the other side of the lake? And they're like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, well, here's some video that we shot this weekend of us running through this gnarly boulder field and class rapids and getting up there and then getting to the far side. And they're just like, wait a minute, that you're doing it in that thing, And I think some of the OGs of jet boating understood the miracle of the inflatable boat, because before these tunneled boats came, some of them were running Zodiacs, and they were thrashing Zodiacs with jet motors on them, and they were getting places.
Yeah.
But one of the main differences with these boats is the way that the transom comes down. Like on the old Zodiacs, the transom would come down all the way to the bottom of the boat, and then the floor would come against it, which meant there was a hard fixed point at the rear stern that the rocks would slide along. And the Russians kind of changed that, and they shortened the transom up, and they let that air floor, that I-beam air floor, run underneath and run past. So now when you're sliding over a rock, you have a very slippery polyurethane surface that guides and sort of slides over these rocks, and creates sort of a path of least resistance. And all of a sudden, you're able to run over stuff that if you hit it with an aluminum boat, you just come to a dead stop.
Yes. So you just can keep some momentum going, and then just keep going further and get to the lake or the glacial lake. I've seen amazing footage of you making it through like archways of glaciers and stuff, and going through all the way. It's incredible footage.
So the combination of them being able to run shallow, of them being lightweight, so that if they get stuck, essentially you can move the boat without it being a game over. And then also because they're full of air, if you get stuck against any strainers or even in the river, like I've had the boat full to the gunnels on both sides of water, just a couple feet of water in the entire boat, but the boat still floats. It's like a portable air mattress. So we treat it like a raft at that motor. And as long as you're still wired in and the motor's running, you can sort of surf over to a rock and kind of put your bow up and crest it on a wave and give yourself a minute for the water to kind of drain out the back of the boat and become light again. And then you can continue on. Whereas if that was an aluminum boat, it would sink instantly and just turn into a crumpled can of mess at the bottom of the river. And you'd never see it again.
It's absolute chaos moment, right? You know that it's doomsday for the boat.
Yeah. And we've done some cool things with it, apart from, we've gone places where people haven't had boats before. We've gone up rivers to the headwaters. One of the things that we did was a friend of mine who shot my original videos. He kind of coined this term called chasing glaciers. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of it. We'd start at the beginning of a river that we didn't know, and we'd try to follow it all the way up to the headwaters, to the top. And we'd find all sorts of different types of flow and different kind of obstacles on the way. And became very challenging and very fun to sort of do this. And I sort of likened it to a bit of my climbing past. We'd sort of talk about the rivers afterwards, and I'd say, well, we ran this one pretty well, but we didn't quite run it clean. So we're going to have to go back and red point it, and take these areas that we had missed and sort of clean them up and make sure that we get a clean pass on it. And we're always trying to pursue like a beautiful aesthetic line. We'll also, like, in the beginning, it was just smash everything, how capable is this boat, straight down the middle of the rapids, straight up, straight down. And then as I got into it a couple of years later, we're kind of finding like this the soul arc that surfers find, where you sort of find the smoother path, the space between the waves, when you sort of embrace it a little differently. And it's been really, really fun. They've got a lot of really cool advantages, some disadvantages, but not just for exploring, but in the hunting world too. They're very adaptable. They're very efficient platform. They have extreme range, really good weight carrying capabilities, and you can use them in some really creative ways to load your game and kind of get in and out of areas that you just wouldn't be able to otherwise.
So that's exactly something that I was just about to ask you about, because it seems like you found this wonderful combo, like a duality, where obviously the boat is super functional and able to go places, which enables you to do some more epic adventures externally, be it fishing, hunting, which is, I guess, where the drive maybe came from in the first place. But it's become kind of its own adrenaline packed sport in itself. So you've got that like great combo. You just sent me a few pictures and videos the other day. You're able to get places that no one else is going, which means incredible access, I'm guessing. But you guys took 2 moose balls, right? And loaded them up onto your boats. And what's the kind of procedure with that? Because when I looked at a picture, and maybe if it's okay with you, I'll share it on Instagram when I put this.
That's fine.
It's like, how heavy is that ball? Pretty heavy. It's got to be like.
So
Oh,
the area,
you weighed it out. You got like 800 pounds or something of meat. I can't remember exactly what it was from it, but it's a heavy animal, right?
we probably got between both animals like 700 and 750 or something. You
Yeah.
know, the moose that we get down here in the area that I'm hunting, it's a cool area. It's a cool wilderness area where most of the breeding grounds is actually across the border from us in Canada. And
Okay.
so what happens is every year these moose they breed, and as the younger moose are growing up, the larger, more established moose will chase these younger moose down across the border. And
Mm.
so the area that we can hunt actually essentially gets replenished every year from this larger breeding ground, which is far enough away from anyone in Canada that it's not hunted and not really pressured. So if I were to go across the border and go up to some of these flues, I'd see 50, 60-inch palmed out, just massive moose. But in the area that we're hunting, it's more likely that we'll see 1 to 2 year old, the occasional
Uh-huh.
3-year-old moose, which is a paddle bull or something, or maybe 24
Hmm.
inches, and then maybe a few bulls in that area will be shot as maybe a big one for the year would be 40, 45 inches or something. And I was lucky enough to get a larger bull a couple of years ago out of this area. But it's really neat in that way because it gets replenished from this sort of untouchable area, which is too far away for the Canadians to be interested in hunting, and it has a barrier of the border for us. So a certain amount of these bulls come down every year, and most of them get shot. Um, when you're moose hunting, it's interesting. It's more like it's a big animal, so you really
Yeah.
have to think about the logistics of uh, if you're going to hunt a deer. The main thing is get to the area of the deer, get an opportunity to have a shot, have the shot, take the deer, and then get it out. But with moose, it's like, well, fuck, we've got this giant animal. Now that it's on the ground, what are we going to do with it? And so, for the first couple of years that I hunted this area, I was very, very active and very stubborn. And I really wanted the experience of a rugged moose hunt. I wanted the experience of just total suffering, of going to some place that people hadn't gone and just dragging a moose out for a couple miles. And so I sort of focused on that. We found an area that people didn't really get to, and we went up. And the first year we went up there, we shot a moose, and we were hiking down this little channel of river, and all of a sudden I could just smell this deep beastie funk. And I was like, oh, there's a live animal that has been close here. And we crested
Okay.
up over this beaver dam, and I'm looking through the scope of my rifle, and I stop. It's this brown animal. And I'm like, what the heck? So I look up above my scope, and sure enough, broadside, there's a 50 yards away, there's this perfect moose, 33 inches or whatever it is. And I kind of chuckling to myself, like, how often in life do things go the way that you just imagined so perfectly? And so we took the animal, and then we spent the next 2 days dragging it out, boning it out, cutting it out. And we were up a creek, so we had to wade down through a bony creek. It was about 2.5 miles, and we had to do multiple trips. And it was really cold, so the meat stayed really good, and we bagged it out and sealed them up, and we did a good job cooling it down. And it was just total suffering. And it was
Yeah.
great in the sense that's what I wanted. I wanted to legitimize to myself like that sort of a challenge of a hunt. But since then, I found out that some of these old guys, these subsistence hunters that don't have any fancy Sitka gear or any other thing, they're a little bit more clever. They tend to shoot the moose on the riverbank or someplace close and drag it into the boat and take it off. And they do in a quarter of a day what took me 3 days to do. So so I'm starting to see as I'm aging the wisdom of some of this efficiency. And we have a friend who lives up there for half the year, and he kind of gave me some good insight into the way that he hunts. And it was a bit of a challenge for me because I want to just go cover ground. I want to explore. I want to see new habitat. I want to see their trails. I want to see their beds. I want to understand how they're moving. And sometimes in certain habitats, like the moose are made for moving through these habitats. You've
Yeah.
got 16 to 20 inches of water on the ground or marsh. And then you've
Yeah.
got 4 to 5 foot tall of grass. And this silly looking creature, which is just the most ridiculous creature you've ever seen in your life. When you watch it from a tree travel 2 miles in the span of, a minute at full tilt, you just think like, holy, how are you going to keep up with that? And it's got these big sonar ears, which just like key into you perfectly and just identify where you are. And it's got this big nose. And so he was saying, tree hunting is pretty popular and pretty established. And I was pretty resistant to it. I'd always sort of been able to find my moose on the back channel of a river with my boat somewhere, or an area nobody else could get. But last year and this year, I resorted a little bit to this tree hunting, and it's pretty cool. You can climb, 20 or 30 or 60 feet up a tree, and you have this expanse of like 1,000 yards that you can see this whole area, and you can kind of watch things unfold at a different pace. And so we went up there, and we knew that they were kind of active in the morning. So we wanted to be in our trees by 6:30, and we had a hunting party of 4. So we'd sort of predetermined these 4 trees that we had wanted to be in that were sort of close enough that we could sort of assist. And if the moose were anywhere in that area, we should all be able to get some kind of shots. And lo and behold, these 3 moose come into the picture. And they were a little bit out of my range, but they were sort of moving towards the next tree. And so we just kind of patiently watched them for a bit. And I realized that they were actually going to go away from the tree as opposed to towards it. So I hopped in my boat and paddled gently down the river and tried to come in behind them. And I was able to sort of spook them a little bit by grunting at them. And I sort of chased them across this little shallow, like little river that I was able to run up, but it was kind of like a slough. And they came up in the meadow on the other side. And as I climbed the nearest tree, I was able to see that my partner was about 600 yards away in his tree. And basically right in the middle, almost dead set at 300 yards, we had 2 bulls and a cow. And so from there, I was able to shoot from my side. He was able to shoot from his side. And we were able to down these 2 bulls about 20 yards apart in the same meadow, which was pretty cool, pretty neat thing. Like, you can hunt for a long time and something like that might not happen to you,
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm wondering, yeah, that's got to be a real moment. Like, just one moose being shot, that's when the work starts, right? So if you had 2 right next to each other, you must have been like elated, but also a bit daunted by the work.
Yes. So when I approached my partner, one of the rules in moose hunting from a tree is that at least one shooter has to stay in the tree, because he's operating as your spotter. And he can see from his elevated position where they are. Because you can walk into some of these meadows and you can be 15 feet away from the animal and you won't be able to see it because the grass is 4 or 5 feet tall. Yeah. So we had one guy in the tree and he was spotting us in, and I ran into my other partner who came over, and he was just excited and exuberant. And I was kind of like, yep, well, the work starts now, fully understanding what it was. And he was kind of a little put off by why I wasn't more excited, but I knew, there's a bunch of logistics that still have to happen in order for this hunt to be successful. And what's cool is we're able to run our boats up this slough, and parts of this slough are just very shallow, especially the entrance. But once we got them in there, we were able to park our boats about 70 yards from where these 2 moose were.
Perfect.
And parked them on the bank and went in and gutted the animals, cleaned them out. And I have a small little, like a Honda capstan winch with about 500 feet of line. And so we're able to hook onto the moose antlers, create a anchor from multiple anchor points of trees and shrubs and ground. And we drag the moose over. And like, this isn't it's not like a heroic thing. Like, we didn't discover this. We came into this area of moose hunting where people have been established hunting these moose in this subsistence way for a long time. And so having the winch and having the area, like, this is knowledge that I got from someone else, like having the boats is cool because I can adapt the knowledge that they had with my new technology or my new boat if you want. But I mean, a lot of this was just using guidance from people who knew the area very well, who were willing to share that with us and put us in a place that we were able to succeed. So we got these really cool a feature of these boats is that they're easily moved, but we've also got these inflatable tube rollers that are about 9 inches and they're about 6 feet long. And those are made for if you get your boat stuck too shallow, you can lift up the bow of the boat, stuff the roller underneath it, and then with 2 or 3 rollers, you can begin to just roll your boat until you can get to a deeper area. So
Okay.
you drug the moose to within about 5 or 6 feet of the boat, and then the elevation of the boat is standing 24 inches or whatever above the ground. So you're thinking, how am I going to pick this big creature up and put it inside? But we didn't have to do that. We were able to just deflate the boat completely, the front of the boat, until it was just lying flat on the ground, and then we were able to put the rollers underneath the moose and just roll the moose antler first into the boat, and then inflate the boat, and then you've got this moose. It's basically like a landing craft. And it's a very cool application. We did it one time a couple years ago where the moose was shot in a shallow slough and it was actually floating. And as it was floating, we were able to deflate the boat, and we actually floated the moose into the boat. And the boat was full of water, but it was still floating. And then we inflated it, and all the water ran out, and we were able to run back up to the cabin. So in some ways, it was very efficient having to pull out the gear only one time. I only had to set one anchor, and I could pull 2 moose from it, and that was pretty neat. Afterwards, there's a very bony stream that has a big glacier at the top of it, and most aluminum boats would never go up there unless they had enough water to cover it. But we were able to very confidently take our boat up there and get about 400 pounds of ice. And so we were able to bring that ice back down, and we were able to pack the belly cavities of these 2 animals completely full of ice, pack ice all the way around them, wrap them in tarps, and then the next morning come out essentially and come back to the shop where we hung them on the forklift and put them in the cool box freezer, and we were just able to process them in a really nice, really clean way, as opposed to having them bone them out in the rain and the muck in the middle of a field. And it's really nice. Some people up there are established. They've got their cabins, house cabins or whatever, and they've got the full area for being able to process the whole moose up there. But for us, it was easier just to bring it out. So it's kind of cool.
You really hooked my attention when you said that you just went up and filled the boat with glacial ice.
Yeah.
I was like, that's the fanciest way to cool your animal I've ever heard of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so good.
If I was more bougie or sophisticated, I suppose I would have had a single malt with a bit of glacier ice to sip at the end. But
that's a detail that you should definitely have. You need a break in case of emergency liquor cabinet there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of more questions I want to ask you about the boats and iterations and things. But what I would love to do is go back a bit, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I'd love to ask you about kind of growing up. I mean, clearly there is a stream of wildness in your going through you. Like, you enjoy doing this kind of crazy stuff, which makes for a good story, that's for sure. But you weren't actually born in Alaska, is that right? You were born somewhere else and you kind of moved.
No, I was born in Alaska. Yep.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I was born in Alaska, but my mom is she's Canadian, so I did spend some time going back and forth when I was younger. When I think about it, I don't find myself particularly skilled in any one area. I'm not a great mechanic. I'm not even a great jet boat driver. I've applied my trade as a carpenter and a businessman for many years, and I'm not the greatest carpenter. But something about the summary of experiences that I had as a kid and the accumulation of these different experiences through curiosity sort of led me to reasonable competence in this area. I worked for a period of time as a whitewater raft guide. And in that sense, most people who jet boat don't take their aluminum jet boats through this whitewater because the aluminum boat performs differently. And if it gets tipped over or if it gets pushed against something, it's a big deal. But I think understanding how to read the water in that way made me a little bit more comfortable on being able to attack some of these lines in some of these areas. And so that was interesting. But then also, we grew up down on Prince of Wales. in Alaska, which is an island that a lot of hunters know for having great deer population. A lot of people, that's one of their bucket list hunts, is coming to Prince of Wales and hunting deer. And so we grew up there sort of in a subsistence lifestyle. And I think subsistence goes a couple different ways. Sometimes subsistence is that your family has lived there for generations and they have the knowledge of the land and you sort of grow into it. Sometimes it's someone who intentionally leaves a metro area to like pursue a certain style of life that's contrary to the way that they've been living. I feel like we got into ours simply in a great way, just by being poor, just poverty. We had to survive and we ended up there. And so growing up in Prince of Wales, we had a variety of different places that we lived that you would call houses, you know. For a while, my parents lived in a campground in a tent. And then they moved into a abandoned Forest Service cabin in the woods that had sort of rotting floorboards and an old wood-fired Navy stove. And my dad, this town that we grew up in, Hollis, near the 1900s was quite a bustling affair because of timber, and it had like had a bank and it had a bunch of stores and stuff. But when they shut it down, they put all these buildings on the barges and they were taking them back to Ketchikan, and essentially all the barges sunk. They were going across Clarence Strait and they lost all the buildings. But in the woods there's this history that you'll find in the woods of these different artifacts and stuff of that time period. So I remember we had this rotten floor planks in this old Forest Service cabin, and my dad had went out in the woods and found this big wooden spool for cable that you'd find for logging cable that would be wrapped around it. And he rolled it back into the house and he ended up pushing that over the gap in the floor, and that was our coffee table, you know, and that was good enough. And then from there we progressed to a 14-foot trailer, kind of on the beach in 12 Mile Arm, you know. So you think all your suffering, there's a family of 6 living in this trailer, but we're living on the beach and we're living this subsistence lifestyle. We're catching fish, we're eating deer. We don't have any money, but it's not really suffering, you know. It's a pretty great lifestyle. I'm sure my parents' stress was considerably more than ours was. We're sort of shielded and protected by the innocence of youth, but experientially for me, it meant that I could go run around in the boat or go run around in the woods until it got dark, and I could just experience all kinds of cool stuff. You know, I could, one of the jokes we have down there is that, we ate a lot of poached deer, and people say like poached deer, like I've never heard it prepared that way, roasted or slow cooked. Yes. And I'm like, oh, the poaching isn't the preparation. Like my dad would drive around the highways with his Chevy Cheyenne, and he had a tarp in the back. And if we saw a deer that was close to the road, that thing was getting shot and it was being dinner. And I remember being at the store in town. Town was a gravel road about 35 miles away. And we were there filling up with fuel on our way back home. And we had gotten a deer on the way in. And it was in the back of the truck, and it was tarped and it was out of season. And there was blood dripping off the bumper, you know? And a trooper came up on the other side of the gas pump and started talking to my dad. And I was sitting there staring at this blood, you know, dripping off the bumper onto the ground. And he's like, oh yeah, everything's good. You know, we drove off, and he had no idea that there was this deer hiding underneath the tarp of this thing, you know. And that was very much my way, I think, or our way. My dad was sort of a wild man in that way. Sort of just, I guess, did what was necessary, but was also sort of connected to those things. Maybe even in a spiritual way for him, I don't know. But he would definitely beating to his own drum.
Yeah. How old were you when when you were kind of living in all these different homes and you were at the gas station?
Probably up to the age of about 13.
Okay.
When I was younger, I had a brother that passed away from cancer. And so that was a little bit of an ordeal for us for several years. And then my biological father ended up leaving my mom. And then we finally got a little bit of security when my mom got a homestead and she remarried. And so my stepfather had a fairly established job. And from that point, we were able to sort of slowly become respectable members of society. And do things consistently and sort of be plugged in and have a little bit of stability that we maybe otherwise didn't. But we
So
we didn't have power, we had the
yeah,
generator.
yeah.
And my mom, she's always scheming. She had this great idea that she would build the garbage shed and the generator shed together because of the economy of resources. Me
Hmm.
being the youngest brother, if we were ever watching a movie on the generator, and the gas would go out, they'd send me out to go fill up the generator. And I can't tell you how many times I went out there in the middle of the night when it's pitch black to go fill up the generator, and I could hear a black bear trying to rustle in on the other side of the shed, trying to get to the garbage. And so every single trip back from the generator shed for me was just crouching, looking both ways, and then just fucking dead wind sprint all the way back to the house and slam the door as fast as I can because I was sure that I was being chased by a bear or a wolf or something. And that was
Oh
pretty
man,
formative for my younger years. It's pretty fun.
I can imagine. uh, so tell me then. I'm curious about these wild days. So you're saying like that moment when there was blood dripping off your tailgate. That was your biological father that you
Yeah.
were with at that time.
Hmm.
Is that right? I'm
Hmm.
sure that you must have some more stories of kind of formative moments
Yeah.
for you, close calls or moments that you
Yeah.
were out having adventures.
Yeah.
Any
He
pop to
was,
mind?
he definitely beat to his own drum. He got himself a dog that was half wolf. And
Wow.
this creature lived with us in our 16-foot trailer. And so imagine 6 people in a 16-foot trailer. And we built a little, in Alaska, we call them wanigans, which means basically a wooden addition to your 16-foot trailer. And this dog was very loyal to him. And anyone that would try to get the dog to do anything when he was at work, it would just snap at them and growl at them. It was very, very aggressive. And then my dad would come home and it would just dote and just follow him around on the heels everywhere. And we had a lot of different instances with that dog where he moved like a wolf. He loped and he didn't trot along like a dog. And so dogs would spot him from down the road when we were walking together and they would be like, we're out of here. Like they would see
Yeah.
him moving that way and they would disappear. And he used to go up and down our street and basically antagonize every dog. He'd go up to the dog and he'd grab it by the throat and shake it and pin it down. And then he'd let go of it and he'd do that again. And then he'd go to the next dog and as we were walking along the way, this was sort of his way. And there was a lot of people in town that didn't like that very much. There was a
I can
few
imagine.
times where he was just a little bit reckless. My mom had been married before, and so I have 2 older brothers, one of which has red hair and freckles and glasses. And when we moved into that town, he got picked on a little bit. And I
Hmm.
remember he came home one day and he had been hit in the face with a rock and busted his glasses. A kid had thrown a rock at him. And I just remember my dad grabbing him in the truck and going over to that guy's house. And they were there with this whole family get together with uncles and everything. And my dad walked in and was like, "Hey, your kid hit my son with a rock in the face." He's like, "You should spank him." And they're like, "Okay, we'll deal with it." He's like, "No, you should spank him now, or I'm going to grab him and spank him." And so there are these weird sort of standoffs where people just read the intensity of his nature and they were like, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to escalate this situation. I don't know if I want to do that." Like a year later, my other brother got attacked by a pit bull
Wow.
and attached fixated himself to his neck. And I remember my dad going over there with my brother who had his neck all bleeding and he's like, "Your dog needs to be put down." And they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to do that." He's like, "You can take your dog outside of the house and you can put it down and I'll watch, or I'm going to put it down right there beside your fireplace." And so there's this real weird sort of Wild West aspect to growing up down in Prince of Wales back then before power. There were, some people were getting drunk and having shootouts. There were different, like drug labs and these hidden different things. And it was very like not very policed and just sometimes people would just disappear, you know?
Really?
And it was just kind of like a wild sort of It's just sort of the way that it was, you know?
What did you think about it at the time when things like this happened? I mean, being a kid, did it
Yeah,
kind of, was it just normal to you,
it
or
seemed
is it
it seemed
scary?
so normal. It just seemed like the way that life was. Like, you know, I didn't know that I was poor until I started going to school with kids that had nice coats and shoes that weren't hand-me-downs. You know what I mean? Like we were just
Yeah.
all kind of poor, and we all just kind of had enough, and it was fine. And we all got to do kind of cool stuff, like go out in the boat or go hunting or go fishing, and it seemed pretty great. And then the sophistication of a culture and all the rest of it sort of was like, well, yeah, this is sophisticated, but like it's not more cool. Like I'd rather just
Yeah.
go fishing all day, you know? I'd rather go hunting. I'd rather go out in the woods and explore the stream. Like that seems way more fun and interesting than sitting in a school, you know? And so I got in a bit of trouble in school for several years, but sort of made my way through it, I guess. It was okay. I think as a
Yeah.
kid you're protected. But, you know, there are some things that happened that were scary and looking back on them now, uh, through the lens of a parent, Um, I had a sort of artificiality to my security as a kid. Like I
Hmm.
believed that I wasn't in danger, but I probably was at times, you know. I remember one time I was biking by myself and this truck just started chasing me and tried to drum me off the road, and I ran into the woods and I hid, and two people got out and they ran into the woods looking for me. And I don't know if they were trying to abduct me or what they were trying to do with me, but I remember hiding in the woods and for several hours until it was dark, and then biking my way home and just having my head on a swivel, you know, listening and what's going to happen, you know, and for the next several months, just being kind of keyed in and queued up to like all my surroundings, you know, and just being very aware. And um, there's just kind of weird stuff like that that happened, you know.
Yeah, it just sounds like a lawlessness where you've got to
Yeah,
look out for yourself. You're not going to rely on
yeah,
someone else to save
yeah.
you.
Yeah, you have to develop a situational awareness in order to sort of perceive your own security, you know?
Did you? Yeah, it sounded like. I mean, you said there was six of you in a trailer. Did you get along with your siblings? Was that like? Were you always fighting, or did you kind of just do your own thing and it was fine?
Yeah, both probably, you know, like my older brothers were 5 and 6 years older than me. So
Yeah.
the fighting didn't really come until later because I knew that I was outclassed, you know? I was smart enough to know that they would beat my ass, and I got my fair share of that, you know? Um, as my dad left and my mom had us for a few years, and my brothers sort of had to be there to add some stability while she was at work. There's a few sort of tense years there where you kind of had to figure out how to exist without friction, you know?
Hmm.
And that was okay. But uh I think the usual brotherhood stuff. I was pretty grateful then and even now. Comparatively speaking, I think one of the things that sailed me through it was my mother was just completely remarkable. Like hardworking, good person, always trying to set us up in the best way. And she provided a security through her hard work and judgment that I saw other families struggle in different ways that didn't have that. And
Yeah.
if it wasn't for her, I think absolutely, definitely, positively, without a doubt, my life would have turned out very, very much differently. So I'm
Yeah.
very, very grateful to that. She had a pretty hard way of it in her growing up, and somehow she rose to the occasion to provide stability for us and even went through the heartbreak of losing a son and that being a saga in itself of many years of cancer and surgeries and trying to figure out how to afford it and how to keep her kids healthy and safe while she had to travel with the other kid. And she just provided an amazing amount of stability for us and always challenged us to do and was always, I think, out of necessity, developed a very good style of parenting, which was we'll deal with the big stuff when we have to. You guys have to
Mm.
be responsible for your decisions, and I'm not going to micromanage your life. So ultimately, we became pretty self-reliant and pretty like uh, aware of how our actions would create consequences, should I say,
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
young age. So.
That's interesting. It's funny. I mean, not the same exactly, but I mean, you've clearly had a lot a lot of experiences of a variety of experiences when you were younger. But my wife, there was a reasonable amount of disruption when she was growing up as well, and it's also her mum. It was an absolute, or still is, an absolute like linchpin, I guess is the word, or it's just like a really immovable force in the sense of like, if it wasn't for her, then
Yeah.
things could have been a lot worse, right?
Oh,
And I
yeah,
think it's amazing when
absolutely.
you have, it's so lucky to have someone like that
Yeah.
in your family that
Right.
helping to keep you on the straight and narrow to some extent, but
Yeah.
also the independence as well, and like giving the responsibility to everyone, because there's no possible way that you can keep an eye on everything, can you? It's just, it would so it's like
Absolutely. Yeah.
you're going to have to figure that out yourself.
Yeah.
So then if in that time then that your brother was unwell, I'm guessing a lot more responsibility fell on you if you were subsistence hunting
Um,
and
I was pretty
taking care
young.
of those things.
I was pretty
Okay.
young for a lot of that. My
Okay.
brothers being 5 and 6 years older than me, they had to stomach a lot more of that than I did. Um,
Yeah.
one of the responsibilities I got was how are we going to divide up the chores at home, you know? And so one of my
Hmm.
brothers was going to do the firewood and all that, and the other one was going to do the cooking. So when my mom came home, there would be a hot meal on when she got home from work. And then me was, okay, well, you're the youngest. We're gonna make you do lunches for everyone every day. So, autistic little Stevie, like, uh, what do I love more than anything in the world? Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And like I'll eat those every single day. So I think it was day 3 or 4 in a row of making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and each of my brothers decided, we're gonna make our own lunch. We don't want you to have anything to do with this anymore. And so I got off the hook for that, and I happily made myself peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the rest of the year, you know?
So at the moment, then I'm still curious. As your brothers were older, was there a moment when you did start getting more out into the boonies and doing more of that responsibility of like bringing in animals, or was that just at the point where you'd got to more stability then at that point? You said that
Um,
your mum had married.
yeah, I think it's sort of like there wasn't really a separation, right?
Okay,
Like
yeah, yeah.
the lifestyle was this weekend we're gonna go catch the fish. You know what I mean? And so
Uh-huh.
we're gonna drag the net and the boat out to the river, and we're gonna beach seine, and we're gonna catch our allotment of fish for this year for subsistence. This weekend
Wow.
we're gonna go and we're gonna catch halibut, or we're gonna get shrimp or prawns. You know what I mean? And so it was like there wasn't so much of a separation of like
Hmm.
as things changed, you changed. It was just sort of a lifestyle. Like our water was piped in from the creek, and sometimes in the middle of winter it'd freeze and you'd have to go take apart the water line section by section and let these bricks of ice, fire out and then reconnect it. And sometimes it'd be too frozen. So you'd have to drag it in from the creek with a 5 gallon bucket, and we had to dig our own outhouse. We were one of the first people in town actually to have a flushing toilet that worked because my mom went down to the library and got some books on how this septic system worked. And so we built and installed the septic system. And I remember one of my one of my more mischievous natures was once we had a bathroom and a shower and a toilet, a lot of people didn't have that in town. And so people used to come visit us under the guise of wanting to say hello, but they would want to use our toilet. And I recognized that very quickly. And sometimes I would just keep people chatting for as long as possible, engaging them in conversation without sort of letting the break happen. And it'd be sort of sitting there, starting to do the potty dance and stuff until they just couldn't handle it anymore. And they'd go to the bathroom, oh, do you mind if I use your bathroom? And they'd come out of the bathroom, shit showered and shaved, like they would have totally refreshed themselves. And maybe their laundry was in our laundry as well. But it was sort of a community like that. So my mom was always pretty open and welcoming to that sort of stuff.
That's amazing. That sounds like that's power right there.
Yeah. I should have charged 25 cents a pop for it, coin operated toilet.
Yeah, you could have made a business out of that, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've got a note here. Two things I don't think you mentioned.
Sure.
Well, you mentioned to me in previous conversations, but you said that, and this might be wrong, but you lived in a tree house and a boathouse.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about those too? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
so a float
Please
house.
tell me about that.
A float house, yeah. So
Okay.
one of the places that we lived in between all the places is we were sort of squatters, you know. So we go to one space and we'd have a we'd eke out our little space, whether it was a cabin or a trailer, and then someone would come and say, "Oh, this is state land, you can't be here," or "Oh, this is private land, you can't be here." And so we got sort of chased off. And so one of the in between places was this tree house that was sort of elevated off the ground by like 5 or 6 feet, and it was just a platform, and then it had a blue tarp roof. So open to the elements with a blue tarp roof. And we ended up living in that all summer. And there were lots of bugs and stuff like that. And we had some sort of, you know, cardboard and some kind of mats or something that we slept on. And that was pretty wild, sort of just living in that way. And then one of the last places we lived before my mom got married to my stepdad was it was a float house. So one of the common ways people would build houses down in Prince of Wales is if you didn't have a piece of property, you could get a raft of logs and you lash them together, and then you just build a cabin structure on top of it. And so that was convenient for logging communities because you could tow it from one place to another, and your house could come with you, and you could be in proximity to where you're working and stuff. And so we lived in one of these, but it was drug up on the beach, so it was at an angle, and it was just kind of above the high tide line. And so it no longer floated, but it was sort of, the whole thing was at a bit of a shackly angle. And I think there were times like in November when the tides got really, really high where the tide would actually wash over the floor of it. Like the tide would come up high enough that you for a couple hours, you know, for a week or so, and when the tides were at their highest, you'd have, you know, seaweed and seawater and stuff on your floor. And it was it's kind of an interesting sort of way to live.
Must be a surprise when you wake up and jump out of bed and suddenly your socks are soaked.
It makes you wonder why you have to go outside to pee, you know? I mean, it's like, it feels the most sanitary to your mind, but it's all just going to get diluted and washed together anyway.
That's a funny thing to begrudge.
Yeah.
So I think, tell me about memories of fishing then. You haven't really talked much about that. And then I'd love to ask you a bit more about jet boating and
sure.
all that
No
stuff.
problem. In terms of like fishing and hunting, you don't really have to be a great hunter to get game where we were.
Yeah.
There was just so many deer, just prolific amounts of deer. And I remember many times as a young man getting geared up to go do an alpine hunt and throwing enough stuff in my backpack for a couple days and hiking 10 minutes up the mountain and seeing a fork and thinking, what am I going to do here? Pass the opportunity to go to try to find something or shoot this thing and drag it home. And so a lot of times I'd shoot it and drag it home, and the whole affair would last, you know, half a day. A lot of logging roads and stuff on Prince of Wales from times where they came and logged it allowed good access. And so people can, you know, sometimes on a Sunday afternoon with my dad or something, we just go for a cruise on the logging roads. And sure enough, there'd be a deer. Bang, we'd shoot it, you know? And so in terms of really developing hunting skills in a pressurized way where you're tracking the deer and really like honing the craft, not much of that. You know, unfortunately, I've learned more of that here living in Juneau and getting to places that have more pressure than I really did much on Prince of Wales. And on Prince of Wales, you know, shooting a forked horn or shooting a doe, those eat good. So I was never really motivated to shoot something that had, you know, of anything bigger than that. Just it's like, we're not going to keep the antlers anyway. Like, this deer has a big body and it's going to be tender. It's going to eat good, you know? And so I never really got interested in that sort of stuff until I moved out of it and sort of realized more the thrill of the chase and more like the different levels of being a hunter and being aware and like getting into different zones and getting into the first zone where you see the smaller bucks and the does, and then getting into the next zone. And this is where the higher hierarchy of these bucks start to exist, you know? And so I never really got into that much then. We just sort of shot what was available and ate it. And in terms of fishing, we lived on 12 Mile Arm, which is kind of an inlet that comes off Clarence Strait. And there was really productive halibut fishing, really productive prawns, really productive crab. And then a little ways away, there was a river that we would fish every summer. And basically, we'd take this beach seine net and we'd attach it to the beach and we'd drive straight out. And then when we'd see fish jump on one side, we'd make a U shape and drive it back to the beach. And then we'd drag it in, the lead line and the cork line. And so the idea of going trolling for a fish was absurd, you know, like why would you do that? Or sitting out there jigging was absurd. Like if you're going to catch halibut, you put out a long line with 100 hooks. If you're going to catch a salmon, you put out a beach seine. You know what I mean? You don't sit there with a $200,000 boat and a flasher and a jigger and go, you know, burn fuel for hours on end. It was all just very low tech and very practical. And it was, how could we get, and even our dogs, like there were some streams in town that would just get full of pink salmon and chums, you know, and we wouldn't want to eat those. But we would catch 50 or 100 of them and we'd can, and then we'd have really amazing dog food, you know, for our dogs all year round.
That's madness. How, you said before, I mean, obviously catching fish with a net, and then you said at one point you'd be done, like you just go get your fish for the year. What was the kind of number that was there a number, or was it just you just got as many as you
So
could?
it was a pretty cool deal in that it was kind of community oriented, because there would be people who didn't have the skiff, or older people who had like permits, but they didn't have the means to go out and get it. So we'd go proxy permit. So say for example, you're allowed 15 fish per family household per day fishing or something, right? And you're going to go out, or 25 fish, or, you know, whatever it was. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but we'd go out there and we'd have like a couple proxy permits for these senior elder people in our community. Plus we'd have the permits of us and the 3 or 4 families that was going with us. And so sometimes we'd pull a beach seine and we'd get 60 fish. And so we'd bonk them on the heads, and we'd have a whole crew of, you know, wives and daughters and sons out there gutting them, while the other people were out fishing for more. And so it'd be this whole event of like, you know, catching and bonking and gutting the salmon and bringing them back. And then once we get the quota for that day, we might do that when the fish were in, we might do that for a week. And then once we had our quota, we'd go back and we'd, you know, set up the plywood tables on the sawhorses, and we'd fillet them all out and dry them and smoke some of them. And then a bunch of them would get in the can. For a good part of our life, we didn't have electricity, so it meant we didn't have a fridge. And so like canning food was a big deal. We had a generator at some point, but before that we had, you know, propane lanterns. And so it was just very not advanced in that way, you know. Like the things that we needed for our livelihood was, you needed a skiff and you needed an outboard and you needed a rifle, you know. And if you had a rifle with ammunition and a skiff and an outboard, you could get a lot of things done, you know.
Yeah. So how, I'm just trying to imagine how it must have been so many fish canned if you're doing like a mass situation.
Yeah. Like, I mean, hundreds of fish canned. Yeah. Multiple.
So how did you store that? Did it
multiple like aluminum, like those big pressure cookers, and just stack cans full and just running them off for a full day, and just filleting the fish and cutting them out and then drying them, and having these little smoke houses that we built. And so a lot of them would get smoked and then canned, and then some of them would just get directly canned. And we would do a lot of it. Yeah, it's a big production, and it was cool because it was really community oriented, right? Like nowadays, people have the ability to entertain themselves with this little magic box that we're talking on right now, their phone.
We are.
They can get into whatever niche interests that they want, and we can go to the grocery store and satisfy our need for Wagyu or pork or whatever. And it's like, in that sense, like it was a lot simpler, but there was some pretty cool moments of connection for the community, and like people knew who you were, you know?
Yeah.
You didn't get to run around and throw rocks at people with the anonymity of that. It was like, hey, we saw your kid doing something down by the creek that we don't think he should be doing. And so the whole community kind of watched out for each other. And it's like, was really a legitimacy to, like, it takes a village to raise kids. You know what I mean?
It makes a lot of sense. And also,
especially for a single mother. I think my mom
yeah, oh,
relied heavily
absolutely.
on that, and I think there were a lot of times where we received the generosity of that community when we didn't really have anything, and we were just forced to be vulnerable and grateful. And when the time came that we could pay them back, we did. But some of those things you can never pay back. You just have to be grateful for.
Yeah. It's the power of community, though, right? And
Yeah,
you
pretty
made me
much.
think of, when you were saying that, um, I can't remember where this is from, but I remember reading or hearing on a podcast, more likely, is that there's a kind of a limit, or that anonymity you were saying about, like, something with human nature, that once you get to a community of like 100 people,
Yeah,
the dynamic changes and
yeah,
human behavior can change.
yeah,
So being like within 100 or less people, everybody knows each other, everybody's
yeah,
accountable, there's no
yeah,
hiding, there's no
yeah,
exploiting one another, because
yeah,
kind of group justice occurs
yeah.
immediately.
I've heard that too. I think the number I heard was like 500 or something. Uh,
Oh, okay.
but maybe it was 100. But yeah, it was an interesting observation because of the way that the percentages broke down for people. And then when I was reading part of it was talking about. I think they were actually focusing on the entry of like psychopaths into a population, and like how
Yes.
the percentage wise and how they would affect it, and what that population should do, and how they existed and survived and responded, and um, talking about like self governance as a community versus organized governance, and that was
Mm.
all kind of part of that. But I found it to be pretty interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a rabbit hole we could go down for
yeah,
maybe another day.
yeah. I'll stay away from that one. I'm not informed enough to speak in an educated fashion on it.
Neither am I. Neither am I at all. Okay, so let's go back to jet boats.
Great. I like talking about jet boats.
The thing that I thought was interesting, and we're going to probably go all over the place now, but I'm just looking for a good place to dip my toe, no pun intended, I guess. The idea of, it's kind of, did you use this term or am I inventing it? Like the idea of first ascent, first ascent. So
Yeah,
like going up and being the first to reach
yeah,
the
yeah,
lake,
yeah.
or the glacial kind
Hmm.
of, is it a glacial lake? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So is that something that you guys kind of had a hand in, or is it something that just was happening in Russia, or?
In Russia, they have these boats, and there's actually a handful of different manufacturers that make these inflatable jet boats. There's Vitradel and Otter and Sib and Solar, and so they've been using them to explore Siberian rivers, and different people use them differently. Some people are happy to hop in the boat and fish on the home river that's close by. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
just fish and come home. And some people are using it to go explore more wild places or go run boulders. And then there's a small part of that community that becomes niche, and then a small part of that community that becomes niche and kind of gets to be a little bit more extreme. And so somehow we kind of found our way into being the ones who just wanted to take the river all the way to the end. And some
Mm.
of the places that we got were just places where people hadn't had boats before. And to be in 2023, 2025, 2019, and to be doing something like that, where there's this stretch of water that has never been navigated by a boat before, and you're doing that, there's something pretty exciting and pretty cool about that.
Yeah.
And it sort of has this whole focus all on its own. And so for me, after running the jet boats for a period of time, it became less about this as a vehicle for me to take to get to hunting, or this is a vehicle for me to take to get to fishing. And I spent more time, this is a vehicle for me to explore an area. And I found that the value that I got out of exploring, setting a challenge, and then going and running it was just so much more than I was getting out of fishing or hunting. The hunting and fishing is great, and I enjoy that, and I need to do that, to put food in the freezer. But the
Hmm.
part that was really interesting was figuring out how the river was choosing to express itself at a point in time, whether the water was high or low, or whether it was flooding, or whether it was spitting out chunks of ice. Um, at times these rivers are calm, and then you go back and it's the same river, but it's just a total tempest. Um,
Yeah.
we were going up a river one time, and we hear this crunching, you know, and it's essentially the rocks on the bottom of the river just getting shoved down river. There's so much flow that they're rolling and crunching into each other. And as we're going up this final ascent, this bus-sized piece of ice just emerges out of the river 10 feet in front of me, just breaches like a whale. And it was completely submerged and being trundled down the main flow of this river. And it just finally caught enough lapse in current to engage its buoyancy and just basically erupt right in front of me. And my jet boat partner was behind me, far enough away. I glanced at him, and his eyes are just like saucers, just like, what the hell? And I was able to come along and just clip the side of it, and I ended up running the boat up over the side of it and kind of bouncing sideways and landing in the water just fine. But it's just a wild environment. They're so turbulent. And just like any kind of jet boating, like sometimes the line between having a perfect day and having an absolute catastrophe it's just inches or less. You come into a hard turn and you make the turn and you don't touch anything, or you come into a hard turn and you end up on the bank and you put a hole in your boat, or and it's a very small margin between having a really, really excellent day and having a really terrible day. And so we sort of got into it where the group got smaller, and only the ones who are sort of competent are getting invited on certain types of trips,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to be able to trust those people. You got to know if the person you're going with is an asset or a liability. And then you sort of gauge the challenge of the trip based on that. And then you sort of also have to have this feedback on the trip of like, where's everybody at? Where are we feeling? And if anyone is going to check out, then we all have to check out. We're not going to force someone to go beyond. There's a river that I was pursuing for a couple of years, and I had tried a couple of times, but the conditions weren't right. They weren't good enough for me to get up there. And finally, one time I went up there and kind of breaking a few of my rules, and it was just me and one boat and the guy who has been shooting some videos for me. And the fog was really, really dense. So it made for a really intense experience because the river was flooding. So there wasn't really shore on both sides. It was just trees, and it was full all the way to the trees. And there was a tunnel of fog that you could only see basically what was immediately in front of you in the river. And as we were working our way up, we're finding these different obstacles and waves, and we're moving around these and skirting. And a couple times we got punched into a wave, and the wave came over our bow and filled our boat up. And we got to this rock, and we pulled over behind this rock in the eddy, and we sort of tied off. And I think we were both exhausted from 12 or 13 miles of this just intense, like the sound of the river is intense. The visibility is narrow, and the sound of the outboard just screaming at you, And we climbed up on this rock, and as we were up there, like the fog started to dissipate a little bit, and we got our bearings a little bit, and we saw that we were probably only about a mile, 3/4 of a mile, maybe, to the lake, which was extremely exciting for me because this is the moment, we're going to make it.
Yeah.
However, there was a really gnarly section of rapids between us and the lake. And I mean, some of them had 7 or 8 foot holes and huge waves and narrow wave trains. And some of the ascents were like, there wasn't enough to get around it and take the easy path. And
so when you say a hole, you literally just mean, is it like how the water's flowing? Is like just a huge drop?
Yeah. So if you imagine, like, if you had a car-sized boulder,
yeah,
and then you had water pouring over it,
yes,
there'd be this vacuous eddy sort of on the downside of it, right? And the water would be pouring enough over it that it would come into this void and it would curl back this way, right? So as it curls back in, depending on how much of a differential in height there is and how much space and how much flow, you can get these recirculating holes where if you get your boat close to it, it'll just grab your boat and it'll just suck you into this washing machine, which is a
Yeah.
term that they use in kayaking or rafting. And you're just like,
Yes.
how many circulations of this are we going to get before it eventually spits us out? And it could be
Yeah.
over hours or days or minutes or seconds or whatever. But it's a very negative thing, something that you don't.
Yeah.
And the boats are cool, but they're not that big, and so they're still susceptible to hydraulics and everything, and you have to be careful. And I got back in the boat, and the guy that I was with was like, we're not doing this. And I was like, we're doing this. We are almost there. And I was extremely, extremely excited. And he said, we don't have a plan. We don't have emergency stuff. We don't have this. I said, we have a perfect plan. He said, oh, what's the plan? I said, the plan is I'm driving. You need to just stay in the boat. And he was like, that's not good enough of a plan. And so it's funny because we have this 360-degree, what's it called? Like a GoPro camera mounted on a pole. And he's sitting there, and for some reason, you can't hear the audio because the river is screaming at us. And I'm sitting there with my back to the camera, and he's sitting here looking at me, and all you can see is him just going like, just waving his arms, cursing me out, saying bad things about my mom, saying bad things about this, and he's just like waving his hands. And then there's a moment where I turn towards the camera, and I don't even realize it's there, and my face is just like, it's just like, this is not the way. Like, I'm so disappointed right now. I'm so upset. I'm ready to go. And in that moment, I chose to respect his feelings and go back down. And that was tough for me,
Yeah.
Because I was like,
for sure.
I'll leave you on this fucking rock if I have to. Let's go. You know what I mean? Like, we're here, like we're this close. And I feel like sometimes having a good crew, they'll set you up in a way where you get opportunity to take some chances, but they'll also sort of reel you back in sometimes. You got to have somebody who's willing to push the envelope a little bit. And sometimes what feels like pushing the envelope, it's not always pushing the envelope, because sometimes there's someone who has 1,000 times more iterations and revolutions of that thing, and they just understand where the edge is just a little bit better. And they can get close to the edge in a way that they feel like they're not exposing themselves to as much risk as another person might perceive, because they're comfortable with the complex variables that are involved, right? But to another person, it might be, I'm way outside my zone of comfort. I don't want anything to do with it. And so in that case, we turned around, and it turned out being fine that we did. And we came back up that river another time, early in spring when the flow wasn't very big. And there were other challenges, and we ended up, meeting our objective. But it was very challenging for me to be that fixated, because if you don't fixate enough on a goal, you don't really pursue it, right? So maybe you're not going to reach it. And then when you are fixated, it's really hard to let go,
I can definitely relate to that, man. Yeah, it's really hard. It's gotten me into trouble many times.
Yeah.
Also in rivers and things. I mean, not in a boat nearly as capable as yours, but definitely I did a couple of day passage with a friend, and the flow rate ended up being, I think it was my mistake. It was such a fuck up. Like, we were in a canoe, an open Grumman canoe, right? And it was only supposed to be 2 or 3 rapids through the whole 30-mile section, and the flow rate was like 2.5 times what it was supposed to be, maybe more. And
a little bit.
It was just like rapids everywhere, and it was like, just hang on to your hats the whole way. It was.
So when you go back through those moments in your mind, and you start to dissect where the beginning of those bad choices came from, sometimes you find that it came from a set of presuppositions that was further back than you meant it, or even were cognitively aware of it. And then you start building your plan based on these inaccurate presuppositions. And then you make a bad choice. And then you create another choice, which is this compounding error effect, which really leads you getting into big trouble. So what I try to do sometimes is I try to figure out how to create situations where I can unlock that. And I try to just do that in my brain, and try to just say, like, I need to pull myself out of the situation for a second. I need to check into things that are more like tangible for a second. I need to create, instead of this, because the narrative of your brain creates a really strong artificial reality where the narrative that it's telling you of what's happening is not always exactly what's happening. And it can be very, very formative in your experience. You know, you can meet someone and you can be in a bad mood and you can think, oh, that person is an asshole. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, you're the asshole. You had the bad attitude, you know? It's the same thing for these experiences. You can have your mind so focused on this goal that you're blind to other things. And then you begin making choices based on that. And sometimes it can lead you to pretty bad situations. One of the things that I did is I said, I have to have a basic kit for any trip that I go on, you know, and this, like, anytime I'm in the boat, whether it's a picnic for a day or a multi-day, I have to have a basic trip, which allows me to outfit and respond to these range of circumstances that might happen. You know what I mean? And it's got to be a sleeping bag in case the boat, you know, and it's got to be a sleeping pad, and it's got to be a toolkit, and it's got to be fuel that's clean fuel, and it's got to be a fuel filter, and it's got to be. And once I started doing that, I just found that I could rely more comfortably on my own competency once I was sort of prepared. And so I spent a lot of time going through the boat and modifying the boat in a way that it would perform with simplicity, figuring out what the different connections for the fuel lines were and how to simplify that, figuring out what was complex about the motor and simplifying that. So, for example, sometimes when you're jet boating, you end up in the trees. And there's a joke. It's like, the number one rule of jet boating is that your driver will always put the passenger's face in the trees before he puts his own face in the trees, right? And it's kind of a joke because you're like careening down river and you make a bad corner and there's trees overhanging. And just instinctually, you want to get out of the way and you give a shit about them, not at all, for a few seconds. So sometimes these sweepers come in and they'll end up breaking the key off. You know, and some of the motors that we run, we try to run these performance motors, which are older two-strokes, which are a little bit less fuel efficient, but they wind up faster. And it's a short shaft, large pump, and it's a very, very good motor for what we're running. But this particular model that we have, this Mercury, the key sticks out. And so after breaking a few keys off in the field, I thought, well, I'm going to change this. So I took my motor apart in the winter and I rewired it with a push button start. So now every time I touch the push button start, it'll just fire. I don't have to have a key override. I don't have to anything that can get hit by a branch. You know, they take apart the oil pump. They just simplify it. So you're running mixed fuel, and just go through the motor and go through your whole setup and sort of simplify it in a way that the least amount of things that could go wrong. You know, figure out where in your fuel line you want it to be a hard connection and where you want it to be a connection that you can take apart in the field in case you have to. You know what I mean? Figuring out if you want your motor to be ran with a hydraulic tilt trim system, which can hold your motor down hard, but can also pick your motor up, or if you want to swap it out to the older style air piston. And the air piston has an advantage because if you leave it open, when you're accelerating towards an obstacle, when you come off the throttle, the water that's floating up through the tunnel will actually pick the engine up 3 or 4 inches, and you can glide over the obstacle without hitting it. Versus a newer style with the hydraulic will hold it down hard. And if you slide over a log, it'll just impact that log very, very hard. And so as we're going through it, like, the curiosity for me was like, how can I tinker in the shop with these different coatings, these different setups, these different braces, these different tweaks to the motors in order to sort of optimize my game so that the least amount of things will go wrong in the field. And so in the beginning, we were breaking the braces and we were putting holes in the boat. And then we found different urethane coatings that we could put on the bottom of the boat to make it tougher. We started fabricating a different style of brace that integrated it into the floor. We started modifying our motors a little bit, and we just sort of started tweaking it in a way that kept it very simple. And so that was really kind of a nerdy but very fun part of what we're doing. And it also helped our boats to run sort of optimal. And whatever I would do to my boat, I would do with my jet boat partner. So he has an identical setup to me. So anything that goes on my boat can go on his boat, and we can swap.
Okay, that's perfect. So you're kind of carrying a toolkit or extra spare parts just in case as well, sort of by default.
Yeah, and I think the love of that, like my pursuit of that curiosity of how to sort of like to reduce the variables and how to sharpen and how to hone things. I think that's maybe the only skill that I have. Like, pursuing the honing of that thing. And sometimes the trail is long, and my friend, my Devo partner, will come in and he'll just get right to the point and he'll see exactly what it is. But sometimes the trail leads to other interesting things, which eventually can culminate and distill into useful things, even though it seems like a rather sort of tumultuous and circuitous path to get to where you're going, right? But all
Yeah.
those things, like knowledge informs knowledge, you know, and competency of work informs competency of work. And so I feel like some of that wasn't the most efficient path, but it all led to more good places.
You said that you created all of these. I mean, it's interesting to hear about the whole process of how you developing and evolving and kind of reducing the potential for things to go wrong just by modifying the design of much of the boat. I'm curious then, there must have been moments when it did go wrong anyway.
Yeah.
Like it's inevitable. Looking at the footage that you have, like
Yes.
it's such a wild, such heavy, rapid kind of environment. You're trying to go up it.
Yeah.
You must have some moments or stories when you things just
video.
didn't go right.
I have a video on my Instagram, you'll see me. I'm sitting there bailing the boat out with the only thing I have to bail it, which is my helmet. And I'm talking to my friend and I say, why do you always get me into these situations? And I think you referenced that to me at one point. But I think in order to know where the line is, you have to get as close to it and sometimes over it to figure it out. And so there have definitely been a few times where we have trashed the boats in the field. Huge tear outs, stuff that we've had to repair in the field. At one time, I actually tore probably a 70-inch tear out of my rear right tube section. And because of the way that I had built my frame set, it actually ended up not being a significant problem. If I would have ran the boat stock, that frame that rail would have collapsed, and I wouldn't have had any way of protecting myself from water getting in. But because I built a tube rail which attached to my transom and then ran up longitudinally parallel to both of the large tubes, and I had lashed those rear tubes to it, when the tube was deflated, it still kept a wall there. And so because I had made that modification, it still acted like a boat once I got it on plane. However, we did have to move it was late at night, and we're like, can we do this repair? And I'm like, no, we're not going to be able to get this repair done. I'm like, if it gets on step, let's just go home. We're 2.5 hours from home, like 40 miles or 40 plus. So I would say 60 miles from home, maybe. And if we get on step and we're good, then let's just go for it. So I inverted the cone so it wasn't catching water, because there's a cone on the end of the tube that tapers down, and I inverted it and stuck it the other way. And we put all of our gear from that middle of the boat up to the far side bow and strapped it down on the opposite tube of the one that had blown out. And then we worked our way in the lake, kind of doing these kind of long S-turns until we eventually plowed our way out of this till we were on step. And once we were on step, I was checking my speed and I was getting up in 16, 17, 18, and I hit 23 and I said, 23 is a good number. We're running smooth enough to get out of here.
You can
and
go
I was
straight.
like,
Yeah.
we're not getting off step until we get to the thing. So we ran 60 miles home. Luckily, the inlet where the salt was calm, no problems there. I get to the dock, I lash my boat off, and I run to the trailer. And when I come back down, of course, the motor's underwater almost. You know, it's all the way up to the water, and that whole section of the boat is, because it's not on step, is just underwater. And the guy says, "Hey, I think your boat is sinking." And I was like, "Yeah, I think it's going to be okay." Considering where we came from and considering how much we have to go to get out of the pier, I think we're going to be okay. So
I've also seen some footage of you. I don't know if it was you or one of your buddies that you're going out with, but sometimes these things don't go right. The boat flips and suddenly you're now in the middle of rapids getting washed down. And it's incredible how fast the boat is going downstream once this catches the current.
Yes.
There must have been some pretty scary moments then. I mean, you're wearing helmets for a reason.
Yes. Well, we weren't always wearing helmets, right? In the beginning, we weren't wearing helmets. If you look really closely, you'll see I have a beautiful half moon scar here.
Oh wow!
It's kind of shiny.
Yeah.
And
that's like 3 inch.
Oh
3
yeah.
inch.
It was a flap that was hanging down over my eye.
Like an
And
eye patch
we'd
almost.
ran up to a glacier, and on the way out, the first section was really bony and really steep, and the river was dropping really fast, and there wasn't much water, so you'd probably be getting up to speeds of 36 to 38 miles an hour coming down, which is pretty fast for an outboard jet that usually runs around 27, 28. And it means your decision making in the boulders has to be really good. So I was going to follow and be the safety boat, so I was going to be the rear boat. And my jet boat partner took off, and he took the wrong line. And he has a habit of doing that sometimes, but he always sends to make it work out. So he took the wrong line, and I thought he was going to end up with his boat high and dry. So I tried, as I was cruising, I tried screaming at him and tried to wave to his passenger to move over to the left. And that, second and a half of me not being focused on my objective, I looked up and there was a huge boulder directly in front of me. And I was about to clip the side of it, which I know would have flipped me over. So I just turned the bow so that I just hit it dead center. And we sent the boat up into the air, and when we crashed, my face came forward and just smacked into this hard reinforced lid on this plastic tote that was has all my tools and stuff in it. And so when I came back up, my nose is bleeding and my face I have this big flap of skin that's flopping, the boat's going sideways, and I felt the light just fade for a moment. And I thought, oh, I'm going out. And then all of a sudden the lights came on without going. And I grabbed the tiller, I straightened the boat, I steered over to shore, I took it off. And I had a guy that works with me and came with me for the day to kind of show him how cool these boats were, And he was a younger guy. And he looked at me and he's like, your face is falling off. And I just saw that dead sort of like shocked look in his eyes, And my other guys saw that we had crashed the boat, so they parked down about 100 yards, and they had hiked up on the beach and came up to us. And I was holding my head like this, and one guy grabbed a T-shirt, and so I tied it around my forehead like Rambo. And I was thinking to myself, okay, we've had a bit of a failure in the boat. The boat didn't get a hole in it, but the internal structure, the I-beam floor, had ruptured, and so it had lost its shape, and now it had a big bulge in it. So the I-beam was no longer able to hold the contour of the boat, and it had expanded to kind of like a big balloon. So it was going to perform differently. And also the fuel had been kind of smashed a little bit. So I got out my toolkit, and I was holding my face with a T-shirt and directing the person how to do this. And I was thinking to myself, I feel bad right now, but in an hour and a half, when the swelling and everything happens here, I'm going to be in a bad way. And me and my partner are the only two who have the skills to negotiate getting down. So I have to decide, am I leaving the boat here and going with him? And then 4 of us are going to be in one boat, which is a risk. Or am I good enough to get down? And I decided that I was, knocked around, but good enough to get down. And so we put the boat back together in a way that it would run. We switched partners. And as we were doing this all, I looked over at this friend of mine who works with me, and he had his boots and shoes off, and he was walking around in the creek. And he was just completely out of it. He was in shock so much, he didn't even know where he was. Whoa. And it was an interesting insight into me that, like, sometimes the person who gets affected the most by the shock is the one who experiences it in a secondhand nature and watches it happen rather than that it happens to. And that was interesting because that has come up a few times, that lesson. In that case, I was able to drive the boat out safely, get everyone out, drove to the hospital, had them stitch up my face. And a couple years later, with a little bit of a comb over, I in most cases, I do okay. But I can also kind of when I get to thinking about situations and I come to rub it, I feel the lumpiness, and it reminds me of what happens when I make bad decisions and when I lose focus. Another example is I have a brother who lives in Idaho, and his friends across the street is a guy who grew up in Germany. And for his 60th birthday, my brother said, I would love it if you could give these guys an experience of a lifetime, And I said, okay, we'll take them for a little trip here. And so me and my friend Kurt got together and we got another boat. So we had 3 boats, and there was there was 3 of them, and so we put one in each boat, and we took them up the river to the cabin, and we hung out and cooked them some nice meals. And the next day we planned to go up do this river ascent to this big glacier that they could hike around on, and be very cool for someone from, Germany to be able to experience this on their 60th birthday. And so we got up through the river, and the river was a little bit higher than normal, but everything was pretty clean. And we got up on the glacier, and they're just having the time of their lives. And so I said, hey, can I call a driver's meeting here? I said, look, we've done perfectly so far. Nothing crazy is happening. The river's in good flow state. Sometimes what happens at this point is we feel so excited that we start to take risks on the way home. And we try to make it a little bit more exciting to even get more of the day. I said, in this case, let's play it conservative. I'm going to be the first boat, and I'm going to lead us out to make sure we're taking the best path. You're going to come up in the back. You're going to be in the middle. We're going to take the inside corner of every rapid. We're going to avoid all the big chains. And we're going to try to safely navigate this back to the cabin with minimal risk exposure, because these guys have already had a big day. Well, the second turn in, my friend Kurt, who is not one for verbal directions at all, comes screaming down the middle of the rapids, hits a rock, ejects his boat up onto the bank, slides the boat sideways, basically kick flips his boat, lands upside down in the water. And he's the third boat. So the second boat was oriented in a way to watch them come down. And these guys they're 60 now, but they've been friends since kindergarten. He watches his friend get launched up out of the water onto the side, kick flip upside down and land in the water. And he thinks his friend is probably gone. Anyway, it's a classic pool that they landed in, and it's a long runway before any more features. So they both heads pop up, and my friend Kurt is kind of in shock a little bit, but laughing about it. And the other guy's sitting there struggling, trying to figure out what to do. And the 2 guys that were waiting for them in the boat, the guy pulls out the throw bag, and he hands the one end to the old guy and says, hold on to this. I'm going to throw the throw bag. He says, okay. And he throws his end of the throw bag, and the German guy threw his end of the throw bag, and they threw both ends of the throw bag out at the guy at the same time. So neither one of them was holding on to anything. And the guy gets it, and he looks at it, and he starts pulling, and he realizes, wait a minute, there's nothing to pull onto. So they ended up driving over to where he was and grabbing him and pulling him into the boat. And I ended up going up to the other boat, nosing in and steering it over. We were able to use a carabiner system and lock it onto the far side and tug the boat so that it came right. And then we were able to pull the plugs out and pump it and get the hydrolock out of the boat. We were able to restart it, and we were able to go back down. But what was interesting is for the next 2 days, the rest of that day and the following day until we got back to town, it wasn't the guy who got flipped over, but the guy that watched his friend. We were basically on shock watch with him because he was nearly overwhelmed. He was mumbling and stuttering and pale. And we would jet boat a little bit, and then we'd take him out and we'd go walk around in a meadow for a little bit, get him some sunshine, get him some food. And we had to really watch him closely for the next 2 days until we got out, because he was very nearly in some sort of terrible shock state. And I thought, nothing really happened to him, but his perception of what was happening was so strong that there was a very real effect. And that's it. There's some interesting psychology and some interesting lessons in all of that, I'm sure. But we were able to get him out, and the journey out after that was pretty calm. And we were grateful that, nobody got hurt. But in just a split second, when you're moving, at a rate of speed like that, stuff can go to hell pretty quick. And having the right toolkit to deal with it, and then being able to observe and lead the situation and make sure that you're taking care of people it's a big deal, because it doesn't always go right after that point,
Yeah, right. The emotional toolkit as well is a whole thing, which I guess you've had to learn
a little bit, That's
develop.
In my business, I have a small construction company. And so before that, when I was in college, I took a program called the Canadian Institute of Outdoor Leadership. And we did a lot of Oh, different types of rescues, like caving rescues, like high angle rescue, like water rescue, swiftwater rescue. And so I got a little bit of experience in problem solving and conflict management in small teams like that. And I think in terms of how that has played out with the leadership of small teams and crews and work, and then also for these sort of expedition type things that we try to do, I think it's been one of the more useful skills.
Yeah.
And also for some reason, I feel like maybe my brain encounters that excitement a little differently than most people's. Usually in the situation, everything slows down for me and gets really quiet. And you get these
Mm.
moments of just singularity where you can see pieces moving slowly. And then usually it'll be 20 to 30 minutes later after that critical moment is passed and I'll be sitting there where I'll just get a rush of adrenaline and I'll just start giggling to myself or chuckling or something. And so it's weird in that I'm often not overwhelmed in the moment, but then I get that hit, that release of adrenaline. It's sort of like a delayed response adrenaline. And I can't really explain it, except that I've noted that it seems to be a little bit different than some of the other people that get kind of jazzy on the river. I like to get pretty quiet and pretty focused, and then if something crazy happens, get through it, and then afterwards is like this trickle of adrenaline, and you're just kind of like you get a little bit giddy, and you're like, "Whoo, that was exciting! That was a close call," you know.
I think I can relate to what you're saying. Often I've been in situations which are like dangerous, but in the moment I'm not thinking about how dangerous it is
Yeah,
or how much
yeah,
risk there is. It's
yeah,
just like, this is the problem. These are the
yes,
problems. I need to fix it this
yes.
way.
We need to get
And
on the
then
boat.
afterwards, it's only afterwards, like even days afterwards, you start thinking about how scary that was.
Yeah,
Like you didn't
yeah,
have time to think about it at all. It wasn't
exactly.
useful to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a funny story. We were moose hunting and the river was really high and we were going up this river and it was like I told you before, you could hear the rocks shifting on the bottom and crunching and there were these big logs just getting shooted down and it was like a disgusting mud milkshake of river, you know. And we were going through and the boat hit something that I couldn't see, you know, like a log that was submerged or something, and ended up shooting us towards the bank. And we kind of crashed into this tree and went sideways. And my partner was kind of anticipating it, so he stood up for some reason. And when we crashed, instead of falling out of the boat, he leapt across the boat and essentially accidentally tackled me out of the boat as well. So we both ended up in the water in this milkshake of a turbulent river with rocks and logs going by. And he pops up and he's holding onto the side of the boat and he's looking to the left and he's looking to the right and he's Steve, and he's yelling my name. And essentially, because he tackled me, I rolled over and I was like on his back like a backpack. So I was sitting there and he was looking for me and I was watching him and I just whispered in his ear, I said, Curdy, we need to move to the back of the boat. And he looks at me and that's where I was. And he's like, oh, okay. So I climbed my way in and he got worried that he wouldn't be able to do a pull up, like a muscle up to get into the boat. So
Uh-huh.
we were close to the shore and there's this little twig hanging down. So he, in a moment of crisis, let go of the boat and grabbed the twig. And it's essentially like a vine because that thing, as he pulled it lowered it down and his whole self just disappeared into the river and went, "Goo." And then he ended up pulling it in an arc by holding onto it. I saw that the tree went tight and then it did an arc back to the bank. And here he is stumbling up the bank, you know. So it didn't save him the way that he wanted to, but it did lead him back to the shore. And I was able to climb in the boat and turn the boat around and go get him. And he was kind of jazzed up and excited about it. And I was, you know, very matter of fact. And then 15 or 20 minutes later, we just both just erupted laughing. We just thought it was the funniest thing, you know? Mhm.
It sounds like it. Like
Yeah,
you're basically Tarzan of the river in a way,
exactly.
swinging
Yeah.
on a vine.
Swinging on the vine. Yeah. And I think sometimes that level of where you're laughing maniacally is just your brain's way of dealing with the absurdity of the situation.
Yeah,
And
right.
you're just
Like,
like, what is happening here? You know, I had a time when we were coming back across the river and we got into these 5 to 7 foot waves in the ocean that were coming this way and we were just kind of picking our way through it. And I was with the toad and as we were doing it, this fish jumped across our bow and literally almost slapped him in the face. And we just looked at each other and just erupted laughing. Like, it was just the set of circumstances are absurd already, but this is just another step towards complete absurdity. And we were just, floating out there in pretty bad weather and pretty bad waves, insulated by just this maniacal laughter of like, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen, but we're in this together. So let's figure out how to get through it, and that's what we did.
I've definitely been in that kind of moment. It's like, it's so bad that it's funny, right? There's it's like you've gone full circle again and reconnected to
process it. Yeah. It's maniacal. Yeah.
So I guess one last thing that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you've talked a lot about the boats and developing the technology. But you're kind of in the process of trying to develop. I mean, you have developed boats over the years. You're kind of in the process of doing that now. Is this something that you kind of can talk about? Or
yeah, we can talk about it for sure. So we haven't built our own line of boats. We've always dealt with manufacturers, and the guy that I mentioned that got in touch with Solar early, Jim Bracker up in Wasilla, who owns the company, and we sort of work together to sell boats. It's called Jet Tech. He's done a lot of jet boating throughout the years and a lot of innovation. And he's one of the ones responsible for going over to Russia and helping them get the design for what is probably their most popular seller right now, which is called a Superjet. And that boat is cool because it's sort of a flatter boat than what I run. And it's made to be a very efficient machine. It's made to move high amounts of weight, very shallow for long runs. And because it's so flat, you don't really steer the bow the same way that you do with a boat like mine that has a little bit of a modified V. You end up kind of vector steering the boat, which means you take the ass and you point the ass away from where you want to go, which means the bow sort of turns into where you want to go, and you sort of steer the boat that way. But it's a very, very efficient hull that runs mind-numbingly skinny waters with huge amounts of weight, and it's called the Superjet. And from there, we're always trying to innovate and make the boats better. But we haven't always been willing to, we've been trying to explore this market, and we've been kind of working together. And so it's like, what are our options for manufacturing? Are we going to go overseas? Are we going to go in the States? Are we going to go, we've had these different factories that we've talked to. And so far, we've been trying to commit to partnering with someone who already makes boats and say, can we develop a line of boats for us that has specifications that we want, that will make your boats better in terms of performance, that we can sell to our clients here? And we haven't had a really great success at a long-term solution with that partnership, because the first ones we were doing with Solar in Russia, COVID came and that made some problems. And then after COVID, they decided to get in this big war. And so that was some more problems. And that's still going on. Then we've dealt with a company called Projet. We've also dealt with a company called Outback Boats. And, there's always a tension between we're the manufacturers, this is our boat, this is what we want to do. And then we've invested a lot into the R&D, and this is what we're doing and how we do it. And then we come in and we say, well, these boats are purpose built. So like any boat, there's pros and cons to it. And we're looking for a boat that will maximize a specific niche that we want to reach the people that we're selling boats to. And so sometimes it doesn't always fit with what the manufacturer is doing. There's these really, really cool boats from New Zealand. And in fact, the owner he used to sell Solar, and he developed his own line with a company there called Incept, and he came out with these Outback boats. And they're great because instead of being made out of PVC, they're made out of TPU. And they have new designs, and they're welded, and they're very, very tough. They're lightweight. They're high-performance boats. But in New Zealand, they tend to run the boat on these shorter missions. So they'll have one or two guys, some fuel and a toolkit, and they'll run it for an afternoon or for a day. And so they can take a boat and they can give it some shapes that allow it to be more high performance. But those shapes, when you put 15 or 17 or 1,800 pounds in the boat, perform differently than a flatter shape would. And so sometimes they're not quite as efficient. And so we're trying to figure out how to optimize performance, efficiency, et cetera, longevity, durability, to meet the needs of the clients that we're serving, which are mostly, I mean, to be honest, most of them are hunters, fishers, people who are going for their once in a lifetime or yearly moose hunt, caribou hunt, whatever, up in the interior of Alaska. And then down here in Southeast Alaska, people who are using it the same way, but they need a little bit of a different boat shape because they're often having to cross the salt water to get to the river that they're going to. So we're trying to simplify it and come out with sort of two different models of boats, or three different models. And we've looked at a bunch of different manufacturers. We've had different prototypes made. We've had certain parts of the boats made. The complexity of the floor, in terms of it being an I-beam performance floor, is more complicated than you might think. It's not an easy thing to come up with well, because you have to have enough rigidity for performance, but you have to have it be soft enough to deflect that it doesn't absorb all of the negative energy when you hit a rock or something.
Yes.
And so we've tried to give input to Outback boats, and they've made some changes with us. And we've tried to give input to Project boats, and they've made some. And we have a file of notes sort of for what we would call like a Generation 3 or a Generation 4 boat, which has some very cool features which aren't in market yet. And currently we're trying to figure out if we want to sort of reveal those to the manufacturer we're working with, but maybe not without any sort of like non-compete forms in place, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Or if we can go through the process of having to monetize up and find a manufacturer, or if maybe we're curious about becoming our own manufacturer and doing it that way. But I do think that some of the ideas that we have, there's a lot of people who sell these boats, and we were the first ones to have these boats in North America. Now there's Striker Boats is starting to make a version of this tunnel, even though for years they said they wouldn't. And they're doing a pretty good job with R&D. And there's a company called Swellfish, and there's a company called, the Projets and the Solars. But a lot of those guys that are doing that are selling the boats. And it's kind of like going to a car dealership versus at Jet Tech, like we've run the heck out of these boats for years. We know what works. We know what parts of them are breaking. We know what parts of them are performing. And we want to be able to incorporate the best ideas of the existing into the best ideas of the future in order to build a boat that is really, really successful. I feel like in Russia, there's a sort of value assessment, and if they can make something cheaper, they will. And in some of the places that we've had the manufacturer, they have that attitude. But for us, if someone is going to rely on your product, the product they bought from you, to go 2, 3, 4, 500 miles into the wilderness and rely on what you've given them, you better be damn well that you've given them the best thing that you can, because life's going to hang in the balance.
Yeah. I mean, you've showed that with many of your stories today.
Yeah.
Something popped in my mind when I was thinking about, two things. First of all, a lot of these amazing stories, like there's so much incredible footage that you're capturing with drones and sort of seeing this action as it plays out through the river, like roaring all around you, sometimes getting flipped over. I mean, I was looking through and I've seen all that stuff. But the actual thing that I wanted to ask you about is you're saying about the specific needs of these boats. Have you ever considered, or maybe it already is being used in a rescue capacity? Because I'm imagining in times when winds are high and you can't chopper in and rescue people, pull them out, like surely a boat like this can get far deeper than anything else. Yeah.
So we've sold several boat packages to the state troopers in our state. We've also sold boat packages to fire and rescue. And they have access to, like, say, a town that has a local river that runs up. We've also sold packages to, like, the East Coast search and rescue fire department teams and have flown out and done training packages with those guys. Personally, an example of that would be 3 or 4 years ago, we went up just on a whim, and we were trying to get up to this waterfall, which is kind of tricky to get to. And it's on this river that was always been very, very scenic, but the year previously had really washed out. And we have a lot of young rivers here in Southeast Alaska. And so it had really just been cored out, and there had just been hundreds of trees and hundreds of boulders and stuff because of the huge flooding, and it completely changed the whole shape of it. And so as we're getting up there, some of the pathways that we had used before, they weren't any good. And so we got to a spot where there were trees blocking one flow of the river and a huge dam of trees blocking the other flow of the river. And we couldn't get up. And so we were there, and there was me, my partner, each of us had a guy in our boat. And then there's another set of boats that wasn't with us that came up behind us. And as I was sitting there looking at it, I realized that the shoulder on this path was very close to breaching where an old riverbed was. And so I thought, well, let's go up there and do a little bit of terraforming, and let's move some of these rocks out of the way and see if we can get a trickle of water to come this way and see if we can make our own path, because it's going to be much easier to take this old dry riverbed than it is to cut out these monster trees that are laying across this way, or this whole snarl of trees that are going to go the other way. And so we got up there with a group of kids, and we had our hands, and we were digging some rocks out of the way, and we moved them. We got a trickle, and within 15 to 20 minutes, we had a 3 foot wide, 6-inch deep river of water in this new dry bed, and we were able to run up it and go all the way up to the waterfall, and we had a great day. And it was really, really cool. And a week later, we got a call from the fire department, and they said, there's a guy who was pack rafting, and he was running down, and he got caught underneath a strainer, and he drowned. And we know where he is, but we can't get to his body. Can you help us? And I looked at my partner and I said, we know exactly where his body is. There's a section of river where it came down, there's a corner, and there's some rapids, and there were a couple of trees overhanging. And we said, if he didn't scout that section, and if he didn't know to get on the inside of this turn right away, for sure, there's no way that he was going to make that. He's going to hit that. So we got in our boats and we ran up it. And ironically, the only way that we were able to get up there was because we had sort of terraformed this little path the week before. And so we drove that up, and we got over, and we met the rescue team up there. And they were set up to do like a 3-to-1 pulley system and try to get it, but they couldn't get out and get to the body. So there's a standing wave where the person was trapped. You know, he was caught against a strainer, which is a tree that was coming down into the river, and he couldn't get underneath it. He was trapped in the bottom. There was a standing river, and we took the boat and we ferried the boat over to him, and I sort of had to sort of wedge my leg into the corner of the boat and stick my head underwater and reach down so I could loop a loop underneath his arms and tie it in a way that we could have something strong to pull on. And then we went back over to the edge and we set up the same winch that I use for pulling moose out. We have this little, 4-stroke capstan winch, and we started pulling on it, and we're at about half throttle thinking like this will come off pretty easily, and it was bogging the motor down. So we turned it up to about 3/4 throttle, and it took a lot of pull before the body finally became dislodged. And we were able to dislodge it, and it floated into the mainstream of the river. We went out and grabbed him and rescued him. And then without convening with the rest of the rescue team, we just went up to where the chopper was, put him in a bag, and let the chopper take off with this guy. The rescue team that we were there with was extremely competent and extremely professional. They did a great job. We just had a tool that they didn't have. And our knowledge of the river, and then our knowledge of being able to pilot the boat in a way where that might have been kind of dangerous, but I was able to trust my partner piloting it, made it so that we were able to get to that guy and to recover the body. And I think that made a pretty big impact in their minds in terms of the capability of what these boats could do, and maybe how in that case it was a recovery, but in a certain situation, like on a river in town here, maybe that would be a rescue instead. And so a couple of years later, they actually became clients of ours, and they bought a boat from us. And they had a team come up and do swiftwater training with them in rescues, so that they're now capable and trained up for being able to do rescues on the river.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild story. It's got to be a stark reminder for you as well of like how easy things can go wrong. I mean, it sounds like you already understood what the dangers were of that corner, but there's nothing more real than seeing the exact results, are there, of
I
when
have
stuff doesn't go to plan.
I have a flashback, like somewhere in like '98 or something. I was in a school. We're doing like an avalanche school up on Mount Baker, and it was a
Mm.
crazy high. I don't remember 98, 99, 2000, one of those years. Crazy high snow year, Mount Baker in Washington, and
Hmm.
we dug a pit, pulled half of the snow all the way to the ground, and there was about 6 of us there, and we did the identification of layers and strata and figured out we were doing very sciencey stuff. And at the end, the instructors said, "Okay, one by one, I'm going to have each one of you lie down at the bottom of the pit, and every single person here is going to throw one shovel of snow on you." And we're like, "One shovel of snow, like whatever, right?" So we went down there, laid down, and everyone threw one shovel, and it was enough. I could not pry myself out. You know what I mean? Like I was
Yeah.
stuck, and just the snow holding me down, and my body spread out. I couldn't create enough force to come out of that. And when you have the torrent of a river grabbing every cubic millimeter of your clothes and your body and your skeleton plus your gear, um, that's a lot of force. The pressure per inch or whatever is huge, and you really want to avoid getting into that situation, because once the variables begin to stack against you, it goes wrong very quickly, and there's not a lot you can do to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess you can do what we do to try and avoid those situations the best you can, as you were
Yeah,
saying. But yeah, it's pretty real, the consequences.
yeah,
Steve, I think that's a good time to wrap up with our chat today.
sounds good.
Thank you for sharing so many stories and all
Sure.
your knowledge. And it's about a world that I didn't really know anything about. I've just seen so many amazing videos and footage on your Instagram, which I guess makes sense then. How do you want to send people anywhere? How can people find you, follow you? Is there socials or YouTube or websites that you want to send people?
I mean, they can find me how they find me. I'm not trying to put myself out there in a big way.
Okay.
I'm certainly not shy of it. I have a little account on Instagram. It's at Spicy Fishes,
Okay.
SPOICY Fishes. Maybe you could plug that for me. But
I will.
really, I think that is cool only because it shows people that there's a way to explore the wilderness that may be outside of the parameters of what they've thought already. And it shows off the capabilities of the boats. And it's not really about me. Like most of these things that I've gotten into, like most of these stories that I've told you about, like I don't really get to be the hero of them. Like when I was young, like my parents were pretty cool. And as I progressed and get into things, like usually it's curiosity that has allowed me to and saying yes to different types of experiences that has allowed me to sort of experience some of these cool things. But I'm often with people who are more competent in different areas than I am, and it's cool to be able to experience the world through their lenses sometimes. Like even the guy that I jet boat with, like, yeah, I get to post videos of some gnarly stuff that I run, but he's instinctually, he's a much better operator than me. He just understands it. And even my friend, my little brother, the Toad, like he's wild in a way that I've experienced a lot of cool things being outside through the lens of like his like affection and just infatuation for things. And so as someone who's been kind of curious and competent and sort of measured and collective, I might not be so much of a maniac, but I've been always curious about these things. And I think it's allowed me to have a lot of really neat experiences and sort of accumulate a lot of different types of stories where I get to experience some of like what these other people have really invested into, and
Yeah.
and I get to reap the benefit of that. And so I'm really grateful for that. I think everything I've ever done has been led or influenced by someone who did something pretty cool before me, and so I'm grateful for that and for all the ways that those people in those times were my teacher.
Yeah. Amen to that, man.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Steve. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And if you said that you're kind of in the process of developing a boat, but if you do get to the point where you like have something ready for market, please maybe you can jump on again, and I'm sure you'll have some more stories that you
Of
haven't pulled
course,
out now,
you'll
or
start
you've
you'll
already
start
made
seeing
some more.
you'll start seeing the videos on the interwebs, and you'll get highly suspicious.
Well, it's like you said, like as soon as I saw that footage of you going up these rapids, in my mind I was like, well, this unlocks a whole other world of
Yeah.
like potential places you can go, things you can do. It's
Yeah.
just so, yeah, it's a
And
game changer.
I would
So
also say, like in the most warm way, thanks for your interest in this, and genuinely, if you ever find yourself curious to come up here and experience any of these things, we would make big efforts to make sure that we could put you on board and give you an expedition and experience to see what this part of Alaska is like, and help you sort of accumulate some of your own stories that you can tell firsthand.
oh, that would be so amazing, dude. I'm gonna have to make a plan at some point because I'm
Absolutely.
due a trip up there, up that
Absolutely.
direction anyway. So thank you for the offer.
Sure.
All right, that's another episode done and dusted. Thank you again, Stephen, for all of your time and your amazing stories and your very kind offer to head up and attempt to, it sounds like, risk my own life in some wild rapids, which I am working myself up to, I've got to say. If you enjoy this episode, then by all means, it would be amazing if you could give us a follow or a subscribe, depending on what platform you're on, if you haven't done that already. If you could share this with a friend, that would also be fantastic. The more people who get to see this or hear this podcast, then that gives me more opportunities to talk to more interesting people, which makes the show better, and onwards it goes. So it would be appreciated. Thank you for that if you can do it. I also want to say a big thank you to Adam Brennan for introducing me to Stephen, because I actually asked Adam a while ago if he knew anyone as bonkers as he is in the wilderness, and Stephen's name came up. So Adam, thank you for that connection. If anyone listening knows somebody who has some great stories from out in the wild or does some interesting or weird shit out here, then by all means, get in touch. You can reach me on Instagram, just send me a message, or yeah, I think that's probably the easiest way. I'm not going to give myself too many ways to miss messages. So yeah, just reach out and let me know what's going on. Okay, I think that's everything for this episode. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.